What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So today's video, we're working on another BMW 335D. We're gonna be doing another somewhat common repair to this car. It's actually gonna be this turbo oil feed line. This line runs from the side of the engine block up along the side of the turbos and into a oil distribution block on top of the turbo. It's actually this line right here. This line right here runs into this distribution block, splits off oil pressure to the small turbo, and then this one runs down to the big turbo. That line runs down in here and down along the engine block and behind the turbos and all this piping and everything like that, down to another banjo fitting on the side of the engine block. So it's visible, but the biggest part is getting the line off of the engine block itself, and that requires removing the upper turbo and all this piping, as well as the unbolting and moving out of the way the smaller or the larger turbo down there to be able to get access to the banjo fitting for that line on the engine block. As you can see, this one is leaking. That's why we're doing this job. This is actually it's not super common on these cars. I've seen it here and there. I've seen it on high mileage cars. I've seen it on low mileage cars. I've seen cars go high mileage and never leak. I've seen cars be low mileage, like super low mileage, and leak. So it happens. It doesn't happen to every car, but it happens. While you're in there, you're going to want to replace your upper oil supply line from that block to your small turbo, as well as the oil supply line to your larger turbo, just because of the age. Obviously, this one was already leaking. The other two can also possibly leak as well, so you don't want to waste your time doing this job and then not replace all those parts. We're also going to be replacing the two rubber hose connections in the return line from both turbos that runs together down into the side of the engine block below the larger turbo. There's two little soft rubber sections in the return line that those can get broken down by the oil over time and start to leak as well. So we're going to replace those. I'll show you those as we're doing the job. I will put a link down below to all of the parts that were used during this repair, just so you guys can have an idea of what's needed in order to do this job. I will also do a little clip here following this, telling you all the tools that you're going to need in order to do this job. So nothing else to say. Let's get to it. All right, so as you can see, I've already got some stuff torn apart here. Starting everything off, you're gonna have to take your engine cover off. You can take it off without taking the cowl out, but we're gonna need to take the cowl out to get access to all the stuff over here. So in order to take your cowl out, you're gonna take your microfilter housing out. There's 8s along the cowl there that hold the microfilter to it, and then there's 2 8s that go down into the lower tray for the cowl. Take those out. You're going to take your 2 lids off on either side. They just have snap tabs on the side that pull those out. Set those off to the side. You're going to have an 8 here and an 8mm here that are holding the cowl down. Once you take those 2 8s out, pull the cowl out, you're going to disconnect your rubber seals off the sides of it. Set your cowl off to the side. You're going to have, I believe, 5mm Allens holding the cowl or the engine cover down to the engine. Once you get those off, you're also going to have to take your oil cap off in order to get the cowl out, or the cover off. As you can see, our oil cap's already broken. I believe somebody in the past has tried to remove the engine cover without taking the cap off and tried to pull it around it. It does not fit. You will break the cap like that if you try to pull it around it. Once you get the front cover off, there'll be a back cover that goes along the back there. It also has two 5mm Allens in it. In order to get that out of there completely, you have to remove this piece right here, this trim piece that goes underneath here. In order to get this trim piece out, you have to take your two strut tower braces off. So you have a cover back here in the back that holds that strut tower brace down, or covers up that bolt for that strut tower brace. You put a flat blade screwdriver in there, quarter turn it, pull that cap out. That is an E18 back there. You have to loosen it, but do not have to remove it in order to get the strut braces off, because they're actually forked and they go underneath that bolt, so they don't have to, the bolt doesn't have to come all the way out. Loosen that up. E14 on each strut tower, take your bars out, and then once you get the bars out, you're going to take this trim piece out, which has a 10 in all three of these locations. The two end ones are coarse thread, the middle one's a fine thread, and it screws in underneath here. Once you get it out, you're gonna have to lift your cowl up and mess with it to get that out. You're gonna take this piece off, set it off to the side, and then you're gonna work your back trim piece off. It kind of has to go off to the passenger side in order to come out from underneath here, because it goes down behind the engine. We got that out. Next step is gonna be to getting your airbox out, and I will explain how to do that. All right, so going to remove your airbox. My car actually had an aftermarket filter, made my life a little bit easier. There's nothing else holding it in other than one screw clamp and the plug connection for the mass airflow sensor. Your box is going to be a little different if you're factory. You're going to have two 10s here on the side holding the box down. You have to remove those 10s and then unplug your mass airflow sensor, and then there's a hose that comes off of the airbox and goes into this hose right here. You're going to have to undo the worm gear clamp either here at this end. Depending on where it's oriented, it may be hard to get to. You can also take it off at the airbox end, move the airbox, and then take the hose off down there. There's also a hose that comes out of this factory airbox and goes into this fresh air duct from the front of the car. It's hard to get the airbox out with this fresh air duct hooked up still, so you're gonna have to take that off as well. That has 3 T20s. There's one here in the middle and then 2 here in the front going into this duct. You undo those T20s, pull that duct out to the driver's side, and then you'll be able to remove your airbox. Next step will be to remove all of the vacuum stuff back there, and I'm going to explain to you how to do that. All right, so it's easiest for me to explain to you how to remove this with it removed from the car. Just because there's so much stuff attached to this, it's hard to point it all out while it's in the car and everything's there. First thing you're going to want to do, easiest thing because it's up front, there's a 17mm bolt holding this banjo line into the exhaust manifold. You're going to want to remove that. Next, undo your plug connection for this. This is sensor. Looking down from on top, this is actually going to be what you're going to see when you're looking in the engine bay is this. There's a ton of vacuum lines that run across the top of this. There's 2 vacuum lines that come into, or a vacuum line that comes into, and then another vacuum line that comes out of this vacuum reservoir that's built into this bracket. You want to take your vacuum line off your supply line. You can take off your line out to everything as well, just to get it out of the way. There's going to be vacuum lines here, 2 on each of these solenoids. There's also a plug connection on each of these solenoids. And then there's also a bunch of vacuum lines that run across the top of this and down through this little holding tab here, down to the solenoid that's actually mounted to the engine underneath this bracket. This sensor back here obviously is looped together. This car is deleted, so the previous person looped this together so that it wasn't open to the atmosphere, messing up the sensor in case they needed it down the road. If you're not deleted, this is going to have a vacuum line or like a hose like this. There's going to be 2 of them that run down off of it down to the diesel particulate filter. Just make sure when you're pulling this bracket out that you pull these lines off, because you can risk breaking these little nipples off of this sensor. So get those vacuum lines off. There's going to be a plug connection sitting here for your oxygen sensor. There's going to be another plug connection locked into this tab here for your rear EGT sump sensor. There's another one locked in right here for your front EGT. Those, when you're looking down on them, have a little lock tab in the back of them against the plastic here. You're going to push the lock tab off to the side and push the connector down off of these 2 slots here, and they'll slide off. Once you get those off, you're going to want to unplug them and get your wiring out of the way. Unplug these two here. Disconnect all your vacuum lines. I recommend you getting a piece of paper out and writing down the routing of all these vacuum lines, because there's a lot here and it can get rather confusing. I actually put a picture here in the video showing you the proper vacuum line routing for everything. Hopefully that helps you guys when you're going back together. So we got all the vacuum lines off, all the plug connections off, and then once you do that, there is a 10mm screw here on the side, a 10mm screw here on the side that you're going to look from underneath. This is actually in the car like this, so you can't see those two screws. You're going to have to kind of look like from the side. This one, there's a plug connection in the solenoid valve that's on the side of the motor here that's actually blocking you from getting to this bolt. You're gonna have to unplug that plug connection, get it out of the way to get to that one. And then across the top, there's 3 more 10s across the top here that hold this bracket in, and then you can remove this whole thing. Let me show you what you're dealing with over here. The 2 mounting tabs that are in the side are mounted here and here to this, this bracket here mounted to the engine. And then this is your solenoid valve down here. You see where my finger's pointing, that the plug connection is actually blocking the other 10. You're gonna have to take this connection off to get to the other 10. Once you get all those out, you're gonna pull it out, just kind of weasel it through all of your vacuum lines and everything like that. As you can see, there's quite a jumbled mess in here. It's rather difficult. So once you get this vacuum reservoir and solenoid bracket out of the way, there's a lot of room in here and you can kind of see what you're dealing with now. So the next step that we're going to be doing is taking this heat shield off of this turbo so that we can get access to the bolts that are holding the turbo to the exhaust manifold. So let's get that done. All right, so we got this heat shield removed. To make your job a little bit easier getting the heat shield out, you can actually move this bracket out of the way that was holding the solenoid and was also the bracket that mounted the other solenoid bracket thing to the valve cover. It's going to be 2 10s. There's one here and then one here. You actually see them in the bracket when it's mounted in place. 2 10s. You don't have to take that off. It just makes your life a little bit easier than having to try to like yank this heat shield out of there and deform it when it goes past that bracket. The heat shield comes out really easy if you take that bracket off. Once you get the bracket off, there's a 10 here in that heat shield. There's a 10 that goes here, and then there's another 10 that goes down here in this this mount part right here on the exhaust manifold. You move those 10s, pull your heat shield off, set off to the side. Next thing, just to make your life a little bit easier when you're doing everything, is going to be to get all these oil lines out of the way. These banjo bolts here for this oil line are 14mm, as well as the oil feed line into this block. 14mm here for the line that comes off and goes down to the larger turbo, and then down on the side of the larger turbo down here is a 17mm banjo bolt. So you're going to loosen all those, take those out. Try not to lose your crush washers. Obviously, you're going to use new ones when you're going back together, but you want to kind of learn how to not drop the crush washers now, because when you're going back together, it's going to be difficult to not drop them. So kind of get a feel for making sure that they don't fall off now, so when you're going back together, you have a better idea of what you're doing. So I'm going to get these lines off, and then I'm going to go through how to get this upper turbo off. All right, so once you got all your lines out of the way, obviously this one's not going to move too far out of the way because it's still bolted to the block. You're going to want to get this intake hose that goes into the lower turbo out of the way. Reason for that is to be able to access the screws that hold this hard pipe on and to be able to get the hard pipes off of everything. This is relatively simple to pull out. There is a hose right here that connects from the valve cover to that intake tube. There's a lock connection on here that you have to slide that direction while pulling the hose off. And then you also have a connector here that you also have to squeeze the tab in as well. So once you get this lock ring clipped off enough, start pulling on the hose and pushing in this plug connection, and it'll pull it out of the little locking groove for this clip. And then in order to get it off all the way, you're gonna have to push the clip back in and also push this hose a little bit out of your way. Just kind of finagle it forward, backward, whatever way you gotta get it out of your way to pull this connection off. Once you get this off, you're gonna wanna unplug this line right here from the plug connection here on the car. And then on the front here is a E10 holding this pipe to the front of the motor. Once you undo the E10, there's nothing else holding this in. It just pulls right out of there. So you're gonna pull it out of here, and we're gonna set it off to the side and get it out of our way. Next is gonna be getting these hard pipes off. So The hard pipes have a, what I believe is a 5mm Allen. I'll correct myself here in the video if I'm wrong. Holding these little locking plates on. They're really an interesting way of holding it on. If you look right here, this right here is your locking plate. You take that Allen screw out and the locking plate here comes out of the way, and it's actually holding that pipe in to the turbo here as well as down on the side, and then this pipe as well. You're going to take all of those holding plates out, and then I'm going to also, before you get these pipes out, you have to take the 10mm off right there that holds this oil line. So you take that 10mm nut off so you can get your little bracket off that holds that oil line, get your pipes out of the way, and then we're going to get the pipes off. The pipes are rather difficult to get in and out because they don't flex. Obviously, they're hard pipes, so you're gonna have to like wiggle them out. There's an O-ring on the end of each pipe, so you're gonna have to wiggle them out in order to get them out of the turbos. Once you wiggle them out and get them out of the way, we'll go on to getting this upper turbo out so that we can get our oil line replaced. All right, so we got our hard in-tight pipes out. One thing I wanted to note to make your life a little bit easier, once you get your little retaining clamps off of all these pipes, spray some PB Blaster or some kind of penetrating lubricant in around where those seals sit. Those hard pipes just have O-rings on either end of them, just like that. And that O-ring, having been in there for so long, kind of gets stuck to everything. So you spray some PB Blaster in there, you'll be able to work it loose. Sometimes they're really stuck in there, and even the PB Blaster, you can't get enough play in them or movement out of them to get them to come out. If that's the case for you, but just like it was for me, you can actually unbolt your small turbo and use its movement to be able to wiggle the pipes out. To take your small turbo out, there's going to be 2 E14 bolts back here along the top, along the valve cover side, and then there's 3 11mm bolts holding it to the rest of the exhaust manifold. You're going to take those out, and then down here on this oil return pipe, there is a 5mm Allen that's actually facing towards the back of the car. The Allen side of it is facing towards the back of the car. So you're going to get down in here and get this Allen screw out so you can get this pipe loose. And then down here, the hard pipe goes into a rubber hose. That's one of those rubber hoses that I was talking about earlier that needs to be replaced. There's a worm gear clamp on it. Undo your worm gear clamp, and then pull your whole turbo assembly out with this pipe attached to it. We're not going to be replacing this pipe just because this isn't a problem area. It's that rubber hose down there where it connects to is a problem area. Once you get this out, we're going to move on to getting the big turbo unbolted and down out of the way so that we can get to our banjo bolt down there on our engine block to replace our oil line. So I'm going to get this turbo out of the way, and I'm going to go through what's got to come off in order to get this big turbo out. All right, so we're underneath the car. Before we remove our big turbo, I wanted to show you guys, we're actually not going to be able to remove it. You're just going to unbolt it and kind of push it off to the side so you can get to that line. But before we remove the turbo, you have to undo this oil feed line clamp right here at the end of my screwdriver. You're going to have to loosen that clamp so that you can pull that oil, sorry, not feed line, return line out of the rubber hose. You can either do it at the end here or do it at the end of the engine block over here. I prefer to do it at the end of the engine block just so that you're taking that hose off with that pipe so that you can get this hose replaced, because that's one of the other hoses that we're replacing. But I actually can't get to this worm gear clamp right now, so I'm going to take the turbo loose and move it out of the way to see if I can get to it from up top. Also, underneath here, right here at the end of my screwdriver, is a bolt into a bracket that goes from the engine block. The bracket comes off the engine block and goes to the bottom of the turbo. You're going to have to remove this bolt in order to get this turbo loose in order to be able to pull it away. That bolt, I'm going to say, is a 12mm. I will verify here in the video once I figure it out. I'm not going to be able to get it from down here. I'm actually going to try to get it from up top and reach down underneath, because I can actually reach underneath and feel the clamp on the downpipe. So I'm going to reach underneath and try to get this bolt, and then I'll verify what size it is. But you have to remove this bolt and loosen this clamp here in order to be able to get this turbo off of here. We're going to go back up top and work on getting this bolt off, and then I'm going to show you there's another bracket that has to come off in order to get the turbo loose. So let's go back up top. All right, so we're back up top now. I just want to show you the other bracket that's got to come off. Right here where my finger is, there's a 13mm bolt, and then if you follow that bracket, there's another 13 millimeter down a little bit further. That's attaching the front intake part of the turbo to the AC compressor bracket. You're gonna have to remove this 13 and loosen that 13 and remove it as well to get this bracket out of the way. After you get the one underneath done. And then once you get those two brackets off, we're going to come back over here to the turbo, and then right here there's two 12 millimeter 12 point bolts holding this bigger turbo to the exhaust manifold. These aren't the only two bolts. These other two bolts up here that we took off prior to get the small turbo off actually go all the way through and hold the small turbo or the big turbo to the bottom of the manifold as well. So once you get these two bolts off and the two brackets off, this turbo will be loose enough that you can pull it off the engine and pull it off to the side. So I'm going to get the other bracket underneath here loosened up, get that bracket removed, and then we're going to get our turbo out of the way, and I'll show you how to replace that oil line. All right, so we got our big turbo pulled off to the side. Few things I missed. It's been a while since I've done this job, so I was kind of figuring things out as I go. You're going to have to unhook your downpipe. If you have a car that's not deleted and has a diesel particulate filter, you're probably going to have to remove the diesel particulate filter. I have a previous video where I did a diesel particulate filter delete that you can reference on how to get the diesel particulate filter out. But if you're deleted like this car is and you just have a downpipe, then there's more room for the downpipe to wiggle around in there to get out of your way. So you're going to want to unbolt the clamp that holds the downpipe to the turbo. That is an E10 bolt. You loosen it up. From the factory, I believe you get to it from the side up here. It's like facing towards the passenger side of the car. Since this has had a downpipe put on, it was actually facing towards the bottom, and I was able to get it from the bottom. Loosen that clamp, pull your diesel particulate filter out, or your downpipe you're just going to push back. And then I had to come back up front and actually had to remove the intercooler. I've removed the intercooler in a previous video as well to do the charge pipe upgrade. So if you want to reference that video for how to get the intercooler out, but it's got two T25s on the end that hold it in place. There's a little trim piece across the front that has some locking tabs. You take the locking tabs, turn them 180 degrees, pull the little trim piece out, and then you're going to take the two T25s out and pull your intercooler out. I didn't completely remove it. It's just removed from the passenger side. I unclipped the charge pipe so I can pull the intercooler down, and then I unclipped the charge pipe here at the turbo and pulled the charge pipe out, and it's down at the bottom down there, out of the way. Once I did that, I also realized that there was another bracket on the side of the turbo. It's actually on this part of this housing. It's hard for me to show you right now with the turbo pushed down out of the way, but it's forward of your return line that's sticking up from underneath the turbo. If you look on the side of the turbo, there'll be a 13 millimeter bolt, and if you feel that 13 millimeter bolt, there's a bracket that goes down from it to the side of the engine block. What I did was loosen the bolt at the engine block, but not completely remove it, and then loosen and remove the 13 at the turbo and let the bracket swing down out of the way so that I could get the turbo out the rest of the way. So once I got the bracket off, the downpipe removed, and the front charge pipe removed, I'm able to get the turbo out, pulled away from the engine block so that you can get access to this oil feed line. And if you look right down there, follow that line down, that is the banjo bolt that you have to remove in order to get this feed line out. It is a 14 millimeter. You're going to have to use a wrench to get down in there from the front of the car in towards the bolt. You're going to break it loose, and you can, if you finagle this turbo into the right space, you can get your hand down in between the manifold down in here from up top where we're looking at right now, and unscrew that bolt by hand, pull your line out, put your new one in. Again, you're going to have to deal with trying to keep the crush washers on there. What I like to do to keep them in place is to just put a little dab of like petroleum jelly or something like that on the banjo, on the line itself, and then stick the crush washer into the petroleum jelly, and it just kind of gives you this little stick point so that the crush washer doesn't just fall off and disappear into the abyss. It's kind of like stuck to the line. So I'm going to get this old line off, I'm going to get the new line put in, and then we're going to get everything put back together. All right, so we got our new line put in. Like I said, to make it easier to hold your crush washers in place, I'm going to demonstrate on this end of this thing. Just on either side of this banjo fitting, put a little dab of some petroleum jelly or some kind of grease, something that's oil soluble, so that it's not going to interfere with any part of the oiling circuit if it gets into the actual threads or inside the banjo bolt or anything like that. But just put some on either side of this thing. Put your first crush washer on, put your bolt through, and then stick your other crush washer on, and then stick both crush washers into that petroleum jelly, and it'll hold things from falling apart when you're going down in there. It won't hold the bolt because the bolt's a little bit too heavy for the petroleum jelly to hold, but as long as you put your finger on the back of the bolt as it's going down in there and guide it in there until it hits the threads, you can then, once it's in the threads, use your fingers to start threading the bolt back in. Just the petroleum jelly keeps that washer from, when you're tipping things or like maneuvering it into there, from just falling off, because they don't like to stay on there. Just, I know from experience. We got that done. Torque, not necessarily torque to spec because it's kind of hard without taking the turbo completely out to torque that properly. I tightened it down about as, you know, by hand. It felt it as the old bolt was when you were taking it out. Just tighten it up. It doesn't have to be crazy tight, but don't leave it too loose either. Just use your best judgment when you're tightening it back up. Now that we got that done, we're going to go back underneath. I'm going to replace the rubber return line that goes from the turbo return pipe to the engine block. That line right now should be either pulled off, or it's probably in a space where I can pull it away from everything and swap it out and put the new one in. So we're going to go underneath and I'm going to show you how to replace that. All right, so we're underneath the car. I actually found it out by messing with it that it was a little bit easier to actually put the turbo back in and then take the pipe. If you look right there, there is a pipe with two 6mm Allens bolted to the bottom of the turbo. That pipe, where it Y's off, that other part that goes up over that direction, is where the top turbo oil drain line comes into. We replaced that rubber hose between the pipe and the engine block right there. I actually undid the pipe, took the pipe out, put the new hose on the end of the pipe, and then put it back on, and then put a new gasket on the flange where it goes into the bottom of the turbo. The part for that will be listed in the description as well. I had the new gasket, so I was able to take that off. So now that we got that replaced, I also have the new rubber elbow on that side of the pipe going up to the top turbo oil drain. So everything's together, back together underneath here. I got all my brackets and bolts and everything mounted back up to the turbo. Down pipe is put back on and tightened down, so we're going to go back up top and work on putting the small turbo back in. All right, back up top, we got our small turbo put back in place. I want to let you guys know that to make sure that when you're going to put everything back together, that you don't bolt your small turbo completely in place before trying to get these hard pipes in. It's pretty hard to get them in and out with this turbo bolted in place. So get your pipes put into the turbo, into the big turbo, and into your intake pipe over here. Get all this stuff put back together, and then worry about getting your small turbo bolted down to the exhaust manifold. A little note to help you guys out putting these pipes back in is to put some kind of lubricant, petroleum jelly or something like that on the end of the O-rings in order to help them go back into the holes that they go into, because they've swelled up a little bit. You can replace them. That'll make your job a little bit easier, but you don't have to. Just the petroleum jelly helps them slide back in there because they're a little bit too big for the holes now that they've come out and had time to expand back out. When you're putting this turbo back on, it's there's a lot going on when you're putting it back on. You got these pipes to worry about getting lined up. You have the turbo oil return line coming down here that goes to the side of the large turbo down there, and it kind of like sits over top of the large turbo down there like this. It's just a lot of stuff going on that you have to kind of line up before everything goes into place. So it's going to be a little bit of a fight, but you'll get it eventually. It's just twisting and turning and doing things this way and that way until you get everything in place. Don't forget to tighten up your worm gear clamps down here on your rubber hose from the top pipe to the bottom pipe. Your brackets underneath, there's the bracket that goes backward from front to back, or from back to front into the big turbo from the engine block. There's the bracket that comes off the side of the big turbo housing that goes down to the engine block behind the AC compressor bracket. And then there's your other bracket up here on the front that goes back on. Just don't forget to get all that stuff lined up before tightening everything down. If you tighten everything down, there's a risk that stuff shifted off to one side and it doesn't all line up properly. So make sure you put all your brackets back on before putting your large turbo back in and bolting it into place, and then putting your small turbo back in. Other than that, the only thing I have left to do is to put my vacuum reservoir back on. Just make sure, again, like I stated earlier, to make sure all your vacuum lines are routed in the right direction and to the right things, because if you put stuff to the wrong solenoid or whatever, you can give yourself quite a bit of problems, you know, and then it becomes a nightmare to try and diagnose, because then you're like, well, does this vacuum line go there? Does that vacuum line go here? You know, whatever. So just make sure that you route your vacuum lines right. Document before taking apart. And then if you forget, I included a picture earlier on in the video as reference to where everything goes. Other than that, I just have to put this back together and we will be done with this job. If you guys have any questions about anything that I did here, anything that I might not have covered, please comment down below and I'll be sure to answer your questions. Please like this video. It really helps me out, and I would appreciate if you guys subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you later.
Come, later.